Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Christy Taylor, and I'm so excited to celebrate Women's History Month. And throughout the month of March, we're going to have on some fantastic women sharing their career and professional experiences. And we're going to be highlighting the experiences of women in the workplace and women in entrepreneurship throughout the month of March. And I'm so excited to have my first guest with me, Mrs. Rebecca Bratspies. She is an international renowned law professor specializing in environmental law, human rights, and food justice. And she's also an author. And she's going to be here today sharing with us her career experiences and information about her new and upcoming books and projects. So, Rebecca, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself and share your body of work with the audience.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. As you said, I'm a law professor. I teach at CUNY, City University of New York. We are a school that has a mission to diversify the profession and to bring, to create access for historically excluded populations into the law. It's something that I feel very strongly about. My specialty is environmental justice, which is about the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in decisions that affect the environment that they live in. And that is very much about social justice and racial justice. And I focus a lot on New York City. And in my spare time, I sort of don't stay in my lane very well. I make environmental justice comic books in partnership with an extremely talented artist. And I also just wrote a book about New York City history called Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York Place Names. So lots of things that I do. I'm glad to talk about any or all of them.
Well, I hope that we're able to touch on all of them, but I really have to start with the book, right? That's very interesting. We just had an offline conversation. I told you about my love for history, and I teach history courses part-time. What inspired you to, I think what's really unique when we talk about the career experiences of women, that you're not just the lawyer, you're all of these things, right? So what inspired you to go the route of comic book, or what is the term that they're using for those particular graphic novels,
novels.
In terms of how you are presenting history?
Well, I wanted to create something that would be a little more accessible than my law review articles. I've written probably 60 or 70 scholarly articles, and I love doing that, and it's great, but the readership is, shall we say, small, right? Not, your random everyday person is not going to read a law review article. So I wanted to take some of those ideas and translate them into something that would be fun and accessible and that maybe my kid would read.
Now you talk, the name of your book is Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and Heroes. I have it pulled up here, and I just want to, in this particular niche or area, why did you decide to go that route? Just reading a little bit, it's of New York roads. It says that the New York City's many roads, bridges, and neighborhoods and institutions, they bear the name of these diverse group of individuals that impacted the city's history. And so, what is your particular area, interest with, this particular group of people? What made you go out?
Actually, it's a funny story how the book started, because I live in Queens, which is one of the boroughs of New York, and my parents live in Pennsylvania. And the only way to get there is to drive, which makes me crazy. I wish there was public transit, but there isn't. And driving meant taking a highway called the Major Deegan Expressway, which runs past Yankee Stadium and connects to the George Washington Bridge. And anybody who's taken the Major Deegan knows that what that means is sitting in traffic. And in my case, sitting in traffic, cursing, because I'm not very good in traffic. And I used to always say, who is this Major Deegan? I hate him. And nobody ever knew who he was. I mean, this really important road was named after the guy, but no one had a clue who he was. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then finally, my family got really sick of listening to me complain about Major Deegan. And they said, well, why don't you find out who he is? So I did. And it turned out that he was way less impressive than you might expect, given that he has this major road named after him. And it just sort of got me interested. A lot of roads in New York are named after people. There's the Van Wyck Expressway. There's the Jackie Robinson Expressway. There's the Bruckner. And so I was like, well, who are these people? And then we have some major bridges that are named after people, like the Kosciuszko Bridge and the Pulaski Bridge. And I was like, who are they? And it became a hobby, and then it turned into a book.
You know, I'm going to come back to the book, but I want to, I listened and read to you speak in the beginning, and I read your bio. And I want to talk about the work that you have done throughout your career, because this is a career coaching podcast. And what's very interesting is that some of the first words out of your mouth where you talk about social justice. And my company, we are making the shift to, like, if you've seen us online, we really focused on just like the career coaching arts piece. When I first launched that, I was really just focused on the career coaching aspect of it, right? But over the last couple of months, we have really committed to making a shift to social impact coaching and going back to our roots. I mean, we talked a little bit prior to this interview. My background is in health science and history, and you do all of this work in environmental health and food research. So tell me a little bit, like, what inspired you to go that route in your career? Because I want to just spend, a few minutes or so talking about the inspiration behind the social impact work that you do.
So thank you for that question. It's hard to answer that question, because to some degree it's about like an orientation in the world. I just believe really strongly that everybody has the right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live in a place that is not going to negatively impact their health. And that seems so basic, and yet so many people don't have that. And if we look at who doesn't have that, it is highly racialized. It's not just about economics. It's so much of it is about race, both within New York City, across the country, and around the world. And I think it's really important to talk about that. And I think it's really important to recognize that that inequality is the result of choices we have made in terms of how we structure our laws and how we implement our laws. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can have a much fairer, more equitable distribution of the burdens and benefits of polluting activity in our society. And in fact, when we try to have a more equitable distribution, particularly of the burdens, what we see is that those burdens get reduced, because when people are responsible for dealing with the consequences in terms of pollution of their conduct, they change their conduct. But when they can push that off on somebody else, especially somebody that they think of as other, they're far less likely to recognize the connection between their conduct and the negative environmental effects. So, I think that the way that we solve our environmental problems, the way that we address climate change, the way that we address pollution, is by making sure that all of us are affected by the way that we use resources.
So much of the work that you do, I want to talk more about your passion and more about the specifics regarding the work that you do. Can you give me some examples of projects that you may have worked on, things that you may have done to let's focus on the environmental piece, right? Mm-hmm. People may not always see how the environmental piece relates to human rights, right? But I want you to talk about some of that connection.
I would be glad to. Let me tell you about a project that I've been working on for a couple of years with a community in a neighborhood of Queens called Jamaica. And it is a majority Black community, and it's pretty close to JFK Airport. So if you've flown into JFK, you may have seen this neighborhood. So this neighborhood is one of 3 neighborhoods in New York City that until very recently was burdened with processing 3/4 of the waste that New York City generates on a daily basis. New York City generates 12,000 tons of waste a day. All of it is collected, brought to waste transfer stations, then transferred either to barges, rail cars, or big trucks to be hauled to the landfills where it is disposed of. And all 3 of the neighborhoods that were impacted are majority Black neighborhoods that were redlined historically and have been disinvested in by the city. And if you've ever been to a waste transfer station, right, they are generally very dirty, very loud, generate lots of pollution and lots of odor. So this community was, suffering from noise, odor, dust, pollution, and that's not right. Like, we're all generating this waste. Why are 3 neighborhoods having to deal with all of the burdens? So I've been involved in this for a while. A lot of people have been working on this for a lot longer than I have, but I partnered with this particular community to raise the profile of their struggle, right? It's their fight, but I'm trying to help. So I'm sort of alongside them. I'm not fixing things I'm not saving anybody. My job is to take the skills that I have and that my students are developing and sort of put them at the service of people who are advocating for themselves. So we put together a coalition, first of all, to study the impact of the waste transfer stations on the community. So we had data about the pollution and about the noise. And then we also put together a team, including a couple of lawyers who sued these waste transfer stations for violating the terms of the Clean Water Act, which is a federal law, and the permits that they operate under from the city and the state. And we've managed to get them to settle these lawsuits by committing to really important upgrades to their facilities. So they're not going away. They're still going to be there, but they're going to be operating now in a fashion that is going to not be a blight on the community. It is not like the air is not going to be stinky. It's smelling like garbage. It's not going to be full of dust. This community is going to be able to like reclaim their park, and people are going to be able to sit in their backyards, things that they couldn't do because of the operation of this facility. So is it perfect? No, but is it going to be a lot better than it was? Yeah.
Rebecca, I think that you are like the perfect, when we talk about work solutions in my business is self-transitioning to social impact, you're the perfect person to have on this podcast. While you were talking, I was really, because really, the conversation between us started when we talked about, you just wrote this book, and we're going to circle back to that, right? Because I think that you're a prime example of the power of women being multifaceted, and you're doing things that you really love. You're living a life of social justice and impact, but you're also doing things out of interest. Because I wouldn't look at you, I would assume that if you wrote this book, right, that you were a history professor. If you did this out of interest, you did it because, it's like something that you do. I don't know. And do you consider history a hobby for you? Or what was your just approach to, like, I'm listening to you in this passion that you have for environmental advocacy, right? But then on one hand, I'm talking to you about this book that you just wrote that's in a totally different area. But if you are following in just a little critical analysis here, you know that it kind of relates, right? Because of the fact that you're doing all this environmental advocacy. So you're noticing all these landmarks and these things in people in the community. So there's research behind that. But how do you try to tie that together or justify it in your explanation for yourself? Or is it just like, hey, I'm just a multifaceted person and these are my interests?
Yeah, well, it's all grist for the mill. Like, whatever you do will teach you things that you can use in whatever context. So as I'm writing this book, I'm learning a lot, as I was writing this book, and I'm doing the research about going back to, right, I started with saying Major Deegan. The road has a fascinating environmental history that ties into a lot of broader justice stories in New York City. And the guy himself, it turns out that one of the main things that he did was in New York City was to be the tenement commissioner, which is like the commissioner of buildings. And in that capacity, it was his job to try to make the tenement houses in New York habitable and safe. So, like all of these issues tie together because safe and healthy housing is an important part of environmental justice. And where roads are placed, which neighborhoods roads cut through, especially highways, and sort of where trucks go, is also a really important environmental justice issue. So I am not a historian. I am very much an amateur at that. But I love doing the archival research, and like the book is really gossipy. I don't pretend to be like a social historian who can really talk about theories of history or broader social movements. I'm really looking at like Major Deegan's divorce and his relationship with the mayor and like who's taking bribes and like the gossipy stuff.
I love the gossipy stuff. I think in my history courses, I'm teaching the course now, the post-Civil War course. And so we do talk about some of those major changes like the tenement houses. But my favorite courses to teach are early American history, because I get stuck on the founding fathers and I am very gossipy about. If you ever go and see the Hamilton play, if you've seen that play, and I love the character of King George in that play because he was very gossipy. He was like, I thought I told you, right?
Yeah.
I love that character. And so I really love your approach to this book. I really love and respect the fact that you are doing something out of interest, but it just happens to tie into some of the work and advocacy work that you do. And I just want to go back a little bit. I like to pop up a few statistics when I'm talking to people. And so while you were talking, it came to my mind. It's like, okay, I used to work in an area. In fact, the podcast episode that I was just doing prior to this, we were talking about money and finances. And that young lady was a former student of mine. But in that area where I work in Palm Beach County, people see Palm Beach County and they just see Palm Beach Island, they see West Palm Beach, and they think about like those rich areas, right? But literally 30 miles out in the middle of nowhere, you go down south, southern, if you're familiar with Palm Beach a little bit, you go down Southern Boulevard, there's like 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗶𝗂𝗀𝗃, there's that whole portion of Palm Beach that people don't even realize sometimes that is a part of Palm Beach County. It is literally so. I remember when I went to the job interview in 2010, I literally got out of the car and like it reminded me of an across the track southern, remember like history, like the sundown towns, like across the track type of thing. And I'm literally from Mississippi and it shocked me that much. But I think about that area because when we talk about like industry out there, like sugarcane industry is out there in that community, and there's always the burning of the sugar fields, the sugarcane fields, and when we including myself working out there, experienced a lot of like respiratory issues and other things. So I want to give you some general stats around about things that are happening in the United States and get your comments on those. Because you kind of already spoke to it. It's like, so let me hit you with a few stats. Minorities are more likely to live in areas with poor air quality, which can lead to higher rates of respiratory illnesses. Hispanic children are 40% more likely to die from asthma compared to non-Hispanic white children. African-American children are twice as likely to have asthma compared to non-Hispanic white children. Studies have shown that Hispanic communities, they bear a disproportionate burden of exposure to toxic chemicals and hazardous waste. Some of the very same things you were saying, right? Over 70% of Native Americans live in counties that violate federal air pollution standards, leading to increased health risks. And then I'll give you a couple of more. Low-income minority neighborhoods have fewer. Low-income minority neighborhoods have fewer resources for mitigating environmental hazards, like lead exposure and mold infestations. And environmental injustices disproportionately impact minority communities, contributing to disparities in health outcomes and quality of life. And so you're hearing all of this, right? And you are super lasered in on, and I might be wrong here, on the work within your community in New York, right? But from a national standpoint, when you hear statistics like this, what are your thoughts and feedback?
I think what you just read to us is what structural racism looks like. And I find it very disturbing that there's this whole movement right now to let's not talk about structural racism and somehow to pretend that it doesn't exist, because it is literally the air that people breathe and the difference in the quality that the air that people breathe. And let's just talk about children for a minute, because another project that I work on here in New York City is a project called Renewable Rikers. And it's a plan to turn Rikers Island, which is an infamous jail, right? It is the city's primary jail, and Rolling Stone called it one of the 10 worst jails in the United States. When he was the Attorney General, not the Attorney General, sorry, he was the when he was a government official in New York, 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏 sued New York because of the conditions there that he called like Lord of the Flies. So, right, the jail's going to close in 2027 because of a tremendous public advocacy campaign built around close Rikers. And then what is going to happen to that land is it is going to be used to generate renewable energy and to treat wastewater, and then to take polluting infrastructure, meaning power plants and existing really old wastewater treatment plants, out of communities that were the communities that were most impacted by mass incarceration on Rikers Island. So it's like this restorative justice circle. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is because there's a tremendous connection between exposure to pollution, which causes asthma in children and then triggers asthma attacks in children. That gets connected to days missed from school, because kids miss, like the main reason that kids miss school in many, many places, including New York City, is because of asthma. And days missed from school is the biggest predictor for kids dropping out of school and getting involved in the criminal justice system. So there's a direct line between unequal exposure to pollution and who is likely to wind up in some place like Rikers Island. Now, you got to add sort of inequity and racialized policing on top of that, but exposure to pollution really impacts people's life trajectories in ways that are harmful. And we need to see that. We need to see who is on the front lines of being exposed to that pollution in order to do something about it.
You talk a little bit about structural racism. I definitely, at some point, got to have you back on, because part of our transition to social impact is we're going to be releasing a white paper on our signature framework, where as a coach, I use rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques, but I am incorporating that with DEIA. And I don't go full scale DEIA because I recognize the work that people have put into building out complete DEIA programs and the research behind it. But I am going to be utilizing this framework in my approach to coaching clients and supporting various social impact initiatives. One of the things that I think is very that I think often gets overlooked. I want to even just like make a comment about my hair, right?
Which
the
is
reason
beautiful.
why my hair is like this today is because I read about a case yesterday in Texas where they passed the Crown Act. Did you see that? And then and the young man, I'm like,
that poor kid, yeah.
I'm like, if the hair can't be below the eyebrows or whatever the rules are, if his natural hair is in this state and he does whatever he can to make sure, when I looked at it, it's like he had it, placed very nicely. But it was the statements from the judge, right? And I said, this is just so ridiculous. It's one thing for a person like me to have to be in compliance because I'm in the military. I work for Uncle Sam. But when you have children, I can understand if the child was coming in with pink hair, with, just like totally blatantly violating the rules. But when you have a judge who makes a statement like that about good, what did he say? Conformity, his statement regarding conformity. I made a statement like, what is the underlying meaning of what you just said when you talk about conformity for somebody who goes out of their way to make sure that they align themselves with the rules while still wearing their natural hair? Because in short, what that judge was saying is he needs to shave his hair off, right? They're really, even though we passed
he needs to have his hair the way I want him to have his hair. And it's an outrageous.
It's an excellent example of what you're talking about with structural racism. I literally went to a shop and was like, hey, can you do my hair like this? Having my hair like this in the military, I wouldn't have been able to do this 10 years ago. But we had folks that advocated for us, right? I still have to make sure it's in regulation. But again, I am in the military, right? This is a child. So I think to my point behind that and your comments on structural racism is like, it is a difference between telling people, basically, I felt like that situation was, I'm giving you a seat at the table, but I'm not going to allow you to eat. And we see that in the context of structural racism, right? Where It's like these systematic things that are that people will that seem very surface level that people will inherently overlook. And not
unless
always,
it impacts them, right? Unless it changes your life trajectory. And so many people are like, don't see the impact because it doesn't affect them. And even if it's not necessarily about malice, it's about understanding what the impact is, right? This kid has an incredible story for why he wears his hair the way he does, that is about his relationship with his father and his grandfather. And to not respect that, I'm blanking on his name. I used that case in my
context here, right? It just really shows the structural. It's like you said, right? If it doesn't impact me, it doesn't affect me. So when we go into these communities, and I want you to talk more a little bit about that. And I pulled up some information about you because I want to also make sure that we highlight the work that you're doing as an author too, right? Some of the work that you're doing is also playing into this. You have this Environmental Justice Chronicles. And that is your collaboration with artist Charlie LaGreca-Velasco. All of the work that you're doing in terms of social justice, environmental justice, how does all of this link together?
I feel so fortunate that I have the freedom in my job to explore all these different avenues for trying to think about, like, what does law mean and how can law be demystified for communities that and individuals who aren't lawyers and aren't in law school. And all of these projects I think are a part of that. It was funny, you were talking, I will answer your question, but I just wanted to say something because you were talking. Yeah, so you were talking about being given a seat at the table but not being allowed to eat. And if you look at the cover of Naming Gotham, one of the people who's on the cover is '𝗪𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀, who was the first Black woman to serve in Congress. She was elected from Brooklyn. And she is the one of her famous sayings is, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a chair. Right. She's, and she's a fascinating woman. There's a new biography about her that is way more in depth than my little chapter is. Maybe not quite as gossipy, but she's a super interesting woman. Her campaign slogan was "Unbought and Unbossed," and she would ride up and down the street in a sound truck with a megaphone saying, "This is fighting Shirley Chisholm coming in to talk to you." She ran for president in the 1970s. She was the first Black woman to be on a major party ticket. And I was a very little girl then. I remember I was so excited that there was a woman running for president. And that was a big digression because the folding chair thing reminded me. I'm sorry, I forgot what you asked me.
Well, I just wanted you talk a lot about structural racism, but I mean, everything you're saying here is so relevant, right? Because I want you to go down whatever path you want to in this conversation, because what's most important people see is your passion for the work that you do. And as women, how we don't have to really be monolithic. This whole month is about celebrating the achievements of women. You could have taken a totally different path as a lawyer, Rebecca, but you chose to do the work of academia and social justice. And if you did choose a more corporate path, then kudos to you, because the diverse group of women that I'll have on this month, they chose it. But I could see you living in your passion. But you mentioned, you talk a lot about the implications of structural racism, things that people don't always recognize that are on a very surface level, right? And so my question to you was to talk a little bit more about that. And then I just wanted you to make sure you highlighted the work that you were doing with the Environmental Justice Chronicles, that partnership that you have with Charlie LaGreca-Velasco. How does that all tie together?
Yeah. So I teach an array of classes, including the law about property and the law of, it's called administrative law, how administrative agencies make decisions in our government system, as well as human rights in the environment, climate change, environmental justice. I love teaching. I love being in the classroom with my students. I love sort of talking through these issues with them. And it's real. I mean, first of all, you cannot teach any of these classes and read the series of cases without I think at least, without appreciating the way that, women and people of color, people for whom English is not their first language, are disadvantaged systematically and systemically. It doesn't mean that individuals don't succeed, because they do, but the way that our laws developed was not with the most vulnerable people at the center. My mother couldn't have a bank account on her own until the 1970s, because no woman could, because the law didn't require banks to offer checking accounts on an equal basis to men and women, so they didn't. One of the people who's also in the book Naming Gotham is Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He was the first Black man elected from New York State to be in Congress. He was elected in the 1950s, and while he was in Congress, had a habit, for lack of a better word, I just used air quotes there if you're listening on the radio, of proposing an amendment to every bill that came into a committee that he was part of. And the amendment was that no federal funds could be used for a project that discriminated on the basis of race, gender, or national origin. And that was considered ridiculous, right? It was a completely quixotic campaign until it became Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And now it is the law for everything that the federal government does. And I find that very inspiring, that here was a man who sort of saw what was right and stood up for it, even when everybody else was like, why are you wasting our time? This is ridiculous. And then he won. And, we still have a long way to go in making it real on the ground. But the fact is that our law now reflects the principle that Adam Clayton Powell insisted should be part of the law for a decade before it happened.
I could really go on talking to you another 45 minutes and just listening to you and the passion behind the work that you're doing, the advocacy that you do. I wanted to ask you one final question, because it's your bio talks a little bit about we talked a little bit about the environmental law and you focusing on, we can all see in context how that works with human rights, right? But you also mentioned here food justice. So I just wanted to, in a lot of minority and underserved communities, you have things like, food, they are food deserts, right? And I don't know if any of the work that you do that is related to that, but that's particularly interesting to me as a health educator, because it's literally, some of the work that I've done in bringing attention to those types of issues. So can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you do related to food justice in your community?
I can, and that gives me an opportunity to finally answer your question about the Environmental Justice Chronicles, which is a series of comic books that I have made with an incredibly talented artist called Charlie LaGreca-Velasco. By the way, anybody who wants to can download them for free from my website, which is just my name, RebeccaBratspies.com. They're free to use for any nonprofit or educational use. And one of the things that we do with them is we go into schools here in New York City and we run workshops about environmental justice that are tied to Common Core standards in English and science and history. And so the students they read the comic books, they do sort of close reading kind of things that satisfy Common Core standards. And then depending on which class it is, we'll develop a different aspect of it. But one of the things the kids do is they identify what they consider an environmental injustice in their community. And then we make a campaign to try to respond to it. And sometimes what the kids identify is, why isn't there a grocery store in our neighborhood? And, that is sort of when you're talking about what a food desert is. A food desert is a neighborhood where there is no way to buy fresh food in the local community. there are no grocery stores. Maybe there are corner stores where you can buy packaged food, like you can buy mac and cheese. Nothing wrong with mac and cheese, but it's, can't be the sum total of your diet.
Yeah.
And so, when we're working with a group, and the students always pick what they want to work on, like what's their environmental justice issue. Because I feel really strongly that you can't tell people either what their problem is or what their solution is. You can only listen to people when they tell you what their problem is, and then say, I might be able to help you. How do you want to solve this problem? And then put your talents to use in sort of that solution process. So with the kids, one of the things we've done is we've organized kids to testify before city council about having, fresh, healthy food as part of school lunches, and also composting connected with that, because kids are really interested in waste and what happens to food that gets thrown away. But we also, so I wasn't part of this, but another group that I know has worked to allow people to use their food stamps, or whatever it's called. The names are always changing, right? At farmers markets.
I love
so that they can directly access fresh food from farmers without going through some grocery store middle person, and then trying to bring farmers markets into underserved communities. So it's not only the sort of 𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗃, ritzy neighborhoods that get to have farmers markets, but that every neighborhood one day a week gets to have a farmers market where people can buy fresh food directly from people who produce it. Another thing that we're doing is working on urban agriculture in terms of community gardens. And there's a big fight in New York City about land being used for community gardens, or whether or not the city's going to support that, or they're going to turn the land over for development. So, there are all kinds of different ways, and that ties in with my property class, and the property students sometimes are really interested in that topic. It also ties in with the environmental justice classes and the health justice classes. So, all of these issues are really all different aspects of the very same problem, which is that we have this fundamental inequality, and not everybody has the same opportunities to breathe clean air, drink clean water, eat healthy food, and live on land that is going to support their health and not make them sick.
Rebecca, it has really been an amazing experience to interview you today. I mean, as a coach, if I ever needed confirmation that I'm taking this ship that I'm driving in the right direction, you have been that confirmation. I appreciate and respect the passion that you have for what you do. I love that you are multifaceted, and you've written this book to highlight, even though it's historic book, but you've written it in a way that is accessible information for kids. Because even as a historian myself, I am not going to read a 300-page book about history, especially in the age of technology, right? So I love that you've given us these graphic novels that makes the information digestible and absorbable, even for adults. They make me target kids. Yeah. So we're going to wrap this conversation up today, and I always like to ask for you as the guest to share one final bit of wisdom, and to let the audience know where they can contact you at.
So I guess the bit of wisdom as such, and again, I'm using air quotes again because I don't know how wise I am, but there's no rule that you can't do something just because it seems scary or you don't feel like you have the right credentials. I wrote a history book. I maybe took one history class in college. It was not what I was studying, but and it's not a history book probably that a historian would make. I can't even draw a stick figure, but I'm making comic books because I partnered with an artist who's incredibly talented. And, together we're telling these stories that are really important. So what I would say is, if you want to do something, just do it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. Don't feel like you have a lane you have to stay in. Do all of the things if it makes you happy, but don't feel like I must do all of these things. Do the ones that you feel like you add value to the world and that give you joy or bring you happiness. Because life is short, and it's yours. So you should have fun with it. And as for reaching me, I am 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, my first initial and my last name, on pretty much all social media. And I'm on everything except TikTok because I think I'm too old for that. And also my website is just my last name, is just my name, RebeccaBratspies.com. You can find links to interviews with me, to my scholarship if anybody wants to read that. You can find the comic books there, and you can find information about the book there.
Rebecca, thank you so much for being on today. And guys, Rebecca is one of a few podcasts we're doing as part of our Women's History Month Blitz. And so we're so excited to feature her on the Career Coach RX podcast. You can follow her on her social media sites, as you mentioned, and you can follow us on all social media at Career Coach RX, or you can check out our website at careercoachrx.com or WORxSolutions.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode.